Welcome everyone to the Live Better Connected podcast. Once again, we are here to explore how mobile connectivity enriches our everyday lives. And I'm actually really excited today because we're going to look at the maritime world. We're going to be looking at the Port of Tyne, but we've got together to teach us all about it and let us learn a bit about what 5G and 4G can do in that world. We've got John Goy, who is a solutions architect at BT, and Philip Bonner, who is enterprise account lead at Ericsson. Welcome, Philip. Welcome, John.
Hi.
Thanks, Gareth.
Hi, Gareth. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Now, you've both got some interesting titles: solutions consultant, so I think I said architect does them, and enterprise account lead. So, John, could you explain to us what it is you do?
Yeah, so I work, certainly part of BT, which is major government, which is part of corporate and public sector here at BT Business. My job is to work with our key accounts across the organisation to understand what their kind of business challenges are as an organisation. And then as we understand what their problems and challenges are, we then look at technology and how that might be able to solve some of their problems to either make money or save money, do things quicker, faster, smarter, better.
And Philip, you work for Ericsson. Now, Ericsson, we'll know, is about connecting people. What do you do yourself?
So I'm an account director. I've been working towards BT for a long, long time. And basically the last 4 years, we've been looking at how we can support our customers, in my case, BT, about how we can exploit 5G and how 5G can bring digital transformation to enterprises. So my role predominantly is to support John and his wider colleagues on how we can mutually take the benefits of 5G and ultimately how that helps the end customers.
Excellent. And today we're specifically sort of going into the maritime sector, which itself has a huge amount of challenges. I mean, it's got competition across the world. We're talking about Port of Tyne later, which is one of the UK's major deep sea ports, but we've got competition across the water from places like Rotterdam. We've got energy, we've got climate change. And just before we go into specifically the Port of Tyne, I wondered, how is connectivity going to help those quite critical issues as we go forward?
I mean, I think from connectivity, we all know it in our own personal world. We've all had experience of using smartphones for good 5 or so years, maybe even longer, and we've all seen how we can, improve our lives. We can do our mobile banking, we can pay our bills, we can be more connected. So imagine that in a business environment, and not all businesses are necessarily on that journey. They may at the beginning, some are in the middle, and what we're seeing is that connectivity plays an important part. Whether you're connecting your workforce, whether you're connecting your machines, whether you're using it to just be more efficient, saving electricity, sustainability. There's a whole bunch of things that really needs things connected together to collect more data to then provide insights about what you can do. And so for Ericsson, we've been very much about connectivity for many years. It's very much about connecting people. And now with 5G, it's a question of how do we go one step beyond? How do we then start connecting people and things, and together draw out those benefits that allows enterprises to do more with less?
You mentioned the things. I mean, this is the big change now. I think most people think mobile phones are all about what mobile connectivity is, but it was sort of very much getting into a paradigm shift where it is devices, machine to machine, the Internet of Things that is essentially going to be where the big sort of data heavy usage is coming from. John, your take on it?
I would agree with you. I mean, the Internet of Things, I remember the phrase when it first came about, was it about 10 years ago, maybe? Before that, we had machine to machine, and before that, we had SCADA networks and things like that. But broadly speaking, I suppose, sensors that can collect data, that can deliver them to a single operating picture, which then through perhaps an AI capability allows us to see patterns in that data to then inform the business to be able to do something around digital transformation, which is either going to save them some money, make a process much safer, or potentially give them a sort of a leg up, shall we say, within the competitive market that, of course, is maritime.
I think in terms of the maritime, you can almost look at them in days gone by. A port was a port, and they were just import and export. And I think now we find that ports are more a real estate manager. They're managing their real estate that they own, whether it is moving goods in and out, but sometimes it's a collection point for things that get processed on site before something else happens. So you get a really wide, diverse set of applications that are needed within a port. And so for ports to become more competitive, they need to embrace new techniques to allow them to offer their services more cheaply, but also to be more attractive to their customers. So I think that's where, connectivity plays a vital part, depending on what they want. And they will have a changing set of requirements as time goes on. And they want to be able to have a platform that allows them to deliver new applications, very, very quickly, easily, and cheaply.
And ports are obviously very important to some in an island nation like the United Kingdom. It's what connects us with the rest of the world. Shipping comes in now. Everything is containerized. It's amazing the speed with which a ship can come in. It gets all those containers off and then they disappear into the rest of the country through the transport system and the likes. Now, the Port of Tyne, which is the one we're going to be really focusing on today, is one of the major seaports, but still a family-run port, and has a real ambition to use innovation and connectivity to be one of the best ports there. So, I mean, you guys, I think you are in collaboration, both BT and Ericsson, you've launched a groundbreaking 4G and 5G private network, making it the first smart port in the UK to deploy what we're calling site-wide standalone connectivity. Now, for a lot of people, what does site-wide standalone connectivity and what is a smart port?
So I think it really comes down to, sensors, devices, widgets, whatever you want to call them, which can collate a whole heap of information, can be delivered through connectivity. We know that. We've said that at the top of this podcast, right? But one of the core issues that affects, I would suggest, any port across the UK is they sort of, I suppose, grown up over, in some cases, several hundred years. They've gone through that phase of concrete. Isn't that a wonderful thing to be able to create defences in quaysides and buildings and forecourts and all sorts of stuff? Now, in the case of what we've done at Port of Tyne, they've got an awful lot of concrete. So in order to deliver connectivity, you've got a couple of options, right? You could go down the road of maybe a typical wireless solution, which a lot of your listeners will be familiar with, or we need to go down the use of a 5G solution. And the reason we chose 5G in this world was because it's licensed spectrum, which means it's not congested in terms of its use in the area, which of course Wi-Fi does, and it doesn't maybe have a stronger reach as the likes of 5G. And I think in terms of where we are with the Port of Tyne, one of the key things that they wanted to do was, rather than trying to find technology for technology's sake and technology for a problem we haven't got, let's look at some of the areas that we can make a difference in. And one of those was container scanning, in order to understand the status of a container when it arrived either by ship or by road, look at whether or not it has any dents or damages in and record that using a video-based analytic, which can then be searched on at a later date based on the UIN or the container number, if you will, and then also find out whether the seal on the end of it is in place, which is important for a lot of organisations shipping products. One of them, of course, in this case is Nissan. Nissan is a big partner of the Port of Tyne, bringing new cars into and out of the UK, and also Volkswagen Group as well. So to make sure their products and services are in optimal condition when they arrive and they depart is incredibly important to this organisation, and also to grow that business into the future. Other things around, I suppose, PPE management, making sure people are wearing the right things and in the right
PPE, just for our listeners, please.
Personal protective equipment, hard hats, high vises, boots, that kind of thing. Being able to record that and then do something about it later on. Also, one of the other things as well, there's a lot of heavy plant on these sites, which, would squash somebody, would seriously injure somebody if you had an altercation with one of these vehicles. So for the drivers of these vehicles to be in a position to know where people are from a proximity perspective around these vehicles, 5G lends itself incredibly well for things that Phil will probably step into in a moment as the right connectivity fabric, delivering these into a platform as a foundation that allows the customer to do different capabilities on a common connectivity fabric.
So I'll come on to some of those specifics potentially a little later. But one of the things, just to again put this into, you mentioned concrete, you mentioned 5G, but obviously the big benefit is that you don't have to dig anything up, take up those keys and put all of this in. You can just put it on a crane or you can put it on a building and you've then got a network. Now, obviously, this is some data intensive use. So, Philip, I think you're going to come on to the why is this standalone? Why don't we just use the public networks?
Yeah, so I mean, as John mentioned, he's just gone through a whole bunch of applications that the port want to investigate, and therefore they have they will have a demand, right? And in some cases, it's relatively small demand, but many, many devices. In some cases, it will be high demand on a small number of devices. So an IoT sensor versus the camera. Now, so they know what they want to do, and they will roll it out over time. So the task for us was, we need to provide, the highest quality network across the whole site, and the site is a fairly large site. We're not going to be able to do that in Wi-Fi because it's just not going to give us the kind of coverage. And the more devices we put onto that network, then we're going to find, as we all find out in our own homes, the more devices, when the kids come home and start playing on their Xboxes, our Wi-Fi connections start to go down. We can't have that in that situation. So we designed a network that reached all parts of the port, both for 4G and 5G. And the reason why we use both is because the port themselves had a number of legacy devices that they wanted to use. So they want to use 4G, but they also want to take advantage of 5G. And in that situation, what they wanted to do is put across the whole network high quality, high bandwidth, but they wanted to keep the data within the port. So of course, if it was a public network, your data goes back to the centralized network, goes into the internet, and that's not something they wanted. So data sovereignty is super important, not just for ports, but we see for many other enterprises. So by building effectively a miniature mobile network at the Port of Tyne, coping with 4G and 5G, we could actually tailor the solution specifically to their needs, which obviously we wouldn't be able to do in a public network. They get what they get. So it's tailored to their needs in the areas that they need it. They've got tremendous amount of capacity, and all of that data remains within the port. So it ticks many, many boxes. And the fact that it can cope with 4G as well as 5G, and the reason why we talked about 5G standalone, for your listeners that understand that there are effectively two types. There's the kind of 5G light and the 5G full fat, and we've gone for the full fat solution. And what that means is that they get really great coverage, really great spectral efficiency, based on the fact that they're not relying on any 4G. It's there in its own right to provide 4G services, and the 5G is there. Latency is very low. So some of that video analytics that John was mentioning, you do really want to get that data off the network super quick, and needs to be reliable. So with the 5G SA network, we can provide reliable, low latency data, which means that actions can be taken pretty much real time.
To hear you talk about 5G standalone, because I think one of the things we've seen is that 5G standalone is still to come across the sort of wider gamut of what we know and use every day. But equally, it offers these amazing abilities. So we're already, in Port of Tyne and others, we're actually starting to see that in action, which I think is really fascinating. But going back to sort of the 4G and 5G element, it's interesting because a lot of people think, well, that's it. We definitely get the best technologies out there, the newest technologies, the more glistening ones. But here we're using to keep things going. But actually, there's a lot already happening with connectivity. I think, preemptive maintenance on the cranes. You mentioned the sort of CCTV that you can use so you can track, the containers as they come in. Because the discussion I had with you both just before we came on here was sort of the insurance aspect. Ports are checking and wanting to, and up to a certain point, we're just not really checking it as they could do because it wasn't worth it. But this technology now enables them to see how things go through a port from start to finish.
You're absolutely right, Gareth. So, in the case of Port of Tyne, a damage occurs. It's very difficult unless you keep very detailed manual records about, the status of something when it arrives. In order for you then to go back and depend on that information or rely on it a bit later on. So the idea of having all this video recorded, which is very easily and quickly accessed through, say, the index mark of the container or a time and date or whatever it might be, or a shipping line, it is very easy to go back and get a snapshot of what it looked like when it arrived. So actually, this damage did not happen on our watch. The same thing happens with containers that leave and arrive by road as well. So everything that's in the container yard essentially has been video indexed, and the status of it from the time that it arrived to the time that it leaves.
And I suppose the ability to showcase that again with, one big part of ports raison d'etre is to shave money off it, create efficiencies, reduce costs, and insurance, and ensuring quality of service. So if you can check that as it comes off and know what it is, you can also cover off against, I suppose, more nefarious uses of that people might try and claim against.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the bottom line here is that we don't quite understand. I don't think, because we're none of us are mariners. or operating ports, but certainly we understand that there is a significant saving to be had within the port environment for heading off potential insurance claims or claims against at the outset, which defers it away from them, at the same time of having that as a managed service, also allowing them to have greater throughput of containers. Now, I'm not suggesting, by delivering a video analytic, you're going to get, a better throughput at a port. But I think if there's an understanding there within the port environment, and they've got the right resource and they've got the right materials, the right plant equipment to do things in a faster way or a greater capacity way, then having all of these automatic checks happen behind the scenes removes that as a potential bottleneck.
And throughput for ports is key. It's about getting that ship in, getting the containers off and into the system. The more they're sitting around, they're reducing, they're wasting money, it's fuel, etc. And this is really sort of what key, I think, from and enabling a port that may not be as larger as the other ports to compete on a similar scale.
So even if you can save 5 minutes for that lorry that by the time he arrives on site, drops off his container and leaves, you multiply that by the amount of containers and lorries that are coming onto site, actually can have a big improvement, not just for the port, but for the actual haulage, because they've got their time critical for how long their drivers can drive. So you can actually improve that. It becomes more attractive for the haulers to actually use your port because they know that from the time they enter to the time they leave, they can be on to their next job. It's kind of all these things that actually all have a knock-on effect. And so you're doing it once, you'd say, well, it doesn't really make that much difference. You're doing it 1,000,000 times. It can make a huge difference.
Definitely. And I mean, we're moving sort of into the 5G elements here, which is really sort of where, like you said, I think you may not be able to do everything that we think we can do with 5G already, but what we're doing is laying the foundations, creating that platform so we can do that. So looking into that world, we hear some, people say, well, there's autonomous vehicles and lorries that can go around without drivers. Now, some of that's already happening. You mentioned the Nissan factory. I know there's certain elements of autonomous vehicles happening there. And what other sort of aspects, the kind of technologies can we expect?
But I think there's probably several aspects actually. So one that the port have actually tried out themselves, and actually did a demonstration of this sort of 6 months ago, was being able to move containers around the park, the port, without having to have people in them. So it was semi-autonomous in as much as the vehicle was moving on its own. However, there was somebody close by in order to intervene if necessary. But this idea of using a battery-powered tug unit rather than using a fossil fuel-powered, very expensive, needs to be serviced all the time tractor unit to move containers around from one location to another at a sensible speed in a repeatable way on a set circuit is exactly where the port would like to get to. They have run that trial and it was successful for about a month. Other things that they're super keen on is where they can probably take individuals out of harm's way. So for their estates team to be able to go and survey their enormous warehouses, and they've got the best part of 20, 30 of these things across the whole of the estate. Some of them are run by the port, others are sublet to other tenants and clients, etc. But to go and do a physical survey as is my roof intact, I can now do that with an appropriate drone technology, either piloted or unpiloted, to be able to use, thermal imaging cameras to see what sort of temperature heat leakage looks like, and also to understand after the storm, do I now need to go and repair my roof? And I didn't put a person in harm's way to do that. There's an awful lot that you could possibly do here that actually I think the only thing that stops us is probably our imagination.
I think the other interesting one that I know talking to the port was, they have a lot of roads and they have a lot of heavy vehicles that use those roads. So you can tell over the years the roads wear out. You get a pothole developed, and suddenly someone has a burst tire and that kind of stuff. So what they're very keen on doing is having cameras on all their vehicles that are not videoing the road, but just videoing where a pothole is or starting to develop. It's much cheaper to go and repair a pothole that is started to begin becoming an issue than wait for it to be a massive hole that can damage a tyre. So if you can keep on top of things like that, it's actually amazing how much money they can actually save, because their road system around the port is actually a very important asset as part of the port. So it's things that we as technologists would never dream up.
That we are going to start to deliver in the next few weeks. That is something that we are delivering for them as a sort of an auditable capability of their site infrastructure, which allows operations to be proactive.
It's a technology I think I'd like local authorities potentially to use. I might be seeing drones going around the streets or on the bin vans potentially, or that's an interesting one we hear is that they map with that, but whether they're using it for potholes or not is a different matter. You sort of touched on to safety there, and I think that is one area where this technology really offers some amazing opportunities. You mentioned people not having to be remote operated cranes. We hear a lot about sort of the new virtual realities or what's coming around now, XR, and looking that up. That's extended reality, which is where people can use headsets and things. And I just can delve into that because it's also about training people before they've gone on as well. It's not just necessarily using drones to go and have a look with a headset. It's giving sort of more immersive training.
I think you're right. We within our own organisation, in the education sector, have done a few pilots around immersive classrooms to help kids learn in a different way using 3D content actually enabled by 5G. And that is exactly true, I think, in this scenario. So being able to maybe operate a crane on site, but maybe not necessarily have the health and safety associated with climbing up all those ladders to get to the cab at the top. You can operate it remotely, or maybe if you need to go through some sort of training tutorage program with a number of employees, that there's a new feature on the crane that has just been enabled because these things are all IoT and software, firmware upgradable, right? We can add new things to them. And do that remotely in a sensible, safe way, without having to be, literally on the quayside on what is a deep sea port. It is incredibly dangerous on the edge there. I think some of those other things as well around, how do you interact with heavy plant? So you could almost step through how you offload a container from a vessel with your augmented reality kind of glasses, if you will, and do all the things that normally take months and months and months of training in a classroom. You don't quite understand the context of it. To have that funnily presented to you within your own field of view and actually interact with it is probably going to get people much more savvy, much quicker.
I think it reduces. We speak to a number of enterprises that having retention, employee retention is a problem. So if you can train them up quicker, and then also have them as backup, having using augmented reality to help them in their job, they feel a lot more kind of immersed in what they're doing. And then, as I say, the other one is that if you actually have a lot of repeatable jobs, or you're using cranes or diggers or forklifts and things like that, actually, if you can do that remotely, then actually you don't necessarily need someone on site, but actually you could recruit people to that job who wouldn't necessarily be doing those jobs. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to open up and say, well, I want to be a forklift driver. I've never had the opportunity. I'm not I'm not your kind of stereotypical guy that would do the kind of forklift truck job. Actually, it opens it up to anybody that could do that job because they can do it remotely, because we've got that high quality communications, we've got video cameras, we've got safety systems in place to allow someone to be maybe on site, but actually in a warm office, or even it could be many, many miles away. So it allows you to have much more centralized resources that we perhaps didn't have. We couldn't use that today because the final few meters, there was always a fiber connection, which obviously isn't practical, or there was contention on a Wi-Fi network and it was not reliable. So it just opens up many, many things that we couldn't do before.
Kind of jobs on a port site are many and varied. And I think some people may just think there's the typical, but I imagine we're already talking about data scientists at the moment, and just on that data point, and this is why I sort of want to step on the reason for 5G, especially, and we're talking about 5G standalone, is the amount of data that must be produced from all the operations that you're doing must be phenomenal. Is 5G the technology that can do that?
In terms of the data rates that we can get, the amount of traffic the amount of capacity that we've got on Port of Tyne is 100 times more than what we've got on the public network, just in that location. So the amount of data that we can stream from sensors, cameras, whatever happens to be, is immense, probably far more than what they need today. But the fact is they now have a platform that allows them to bring new applications on board as and when. They can pull it all back to their servers within the Port of Tyne, and they can crunch that data locally. So not only are they collecting the data quickly, they are crunching it locally. It can be completely autonomous. Now, if they want to stream things into the cloud because they've got some specialized AI machine learning type algorithms, they can do that as well. So they really have all the flexibility that they need. But the capacity they have at Port of Tyne is enormous, and it's certainly way more than what they will need now and hopefully into the future.
Gareth, that the customer thought was absolutely second to none was on the key side is where we're focused on all of our video applications for the customer, and being able to change the bias and the upload, the amount of bandwidth we had available to push video up back into the on-site video analytics solution was really key. We couldn't have done that with any other technology. That was absolutely a 5G capability.
And 5G, again, we talk about 5G and the level of data, as I say, that's coming through. Is you talking about, AI needs huge amounts of data to come through, and it has to be done quickly, and that your latency is really important there. Which I read somewhere, it's about this. It's faster than the human brain, which is sort of where we're going. It's almost like a physical cable, but wireless. Where we've gone now. Now, one other issue that really is quite contentious in sort of the maritime industry is emissions. The global maritime sort of body is wanting to get to net zero by 2050. How's connectivity going to help? Specifically, it's not just the ships, but it's the ports as well. How is that going to help them reduce their emissions?
Well, I think knowledge is everything, isn't it? So if you know about it, you can do something about it. So, for example, a lot of the heavy plant that drives around site, which a lot of that is diesel powered, will ultimately one day eventually transition to battery powered or hydrogen or whatever is going to be big in the future. But for them to understand how their plant behaves today is incredibly important to them. So, for example, you will be able to understand how long a particular driver might idle for. And idle obviously is bad for the environment because it's on and it's emitting emissions. So if you're able to understand how drivers drive your fleet and then pass information back to them to drive it in a more optimal way, which is better for the environment because emissions are lower, and it's better for the port because they're spending less on fossil fuels, then that can only be a good thing. I think it is pattern analysis and understanding how they work today to help inform how they need to work in the future.
I think if you take a ship that comes in, a ship arrives, and then obviously you need to start unloading it. You need the hauliers there to remove the containers from the ship and put them onto the yard and so on and so forth. So at the moment, a lot of that kind of collecting serial numbers and making sure that you've actually taken off the container in the right space is all done manually. So as soon as you can start automating that process, you're collecting the data. As John mentioned, you're collecting what the serial number is. If there's any damage, you've collected all of that. So the time that the ship arrives, the time the shipper leaves, and the haulers that are moving back and forwards, if you can reduce that, then you're using less diesel, electricity, diesel on the ship. You start adding that up. That's all a net reduction. So you're never going to necessarily, you can't get a ship in and out in a nanosecond, but you can maybe take a few hours off of unloading a ship that's got 5,000, 10,000 crates on it. Then it actually can start to add up, and you start doing more and more and more of those. You then start introducing battery powered tugs, battery powered forklift trucks. All those things all add up. So it's accumulation of all those things that gives you the ability to move from where we are today to where we want to be.
Yeah. And ultimately we still need to bring things into the country. We still need food, we still need goods, and it's about reducing those emissions and finding and utilizing technologies to do that. Well, look, firstly, I would like to say thank you, Philip, and thank you, John. This has been fascinating to learn about the world of ports and 5G and 5G private networks. I think we've learned a huge amount today, and I think I'm very happy and positive about the world as we go to future. But equally, ports like Tyne are using this really to compete against other ports, not just in the UK, but equally internationally. Now, thank you, listeners. We've got next one I can say is the podcast we've got is going to be with Matt Howard from Assembly Research, with me looking at value of the telecoms industry. So please stay tuned for that. And obviously, as usual, subscribe to the Live Better Connected podcast, and we look forward to seeing you next time.